Um, I see you did. Don't speak. Wait till you hear what I have to say. Dorian, from the moment I met you, your personality had the most extraordinary influence over me. I was dominated, soul, brain, and power by you. You became to me the visible incarnation of that unseen ideal whose memory haunts us artists like an exquisite dream. I worshipped you. I grew jealous of everyone to whom you spoke. I wanted to have you all to myself. I was only happy when I was with you. Oh, look at those four lines. I worshipped you. I grew jealous of everyone to whom you spoke. I wanted to have you all to myself. This is love, right? I mean, he's sort of making his confession. When you were away from me, you were still present in my art. Of course, I never let you know anything about this. It would have been impossible. You would not have understood it. I hardly understood it myself. I only knew that I had seen perfection face to face, and that the world had become wonderful to my eyes. Too wonderful, perhaps. For in such mad worships there is peril, the peril of losing them, no less than the peril of keeping them. And this is probably an important moment too. This is a dangerous confession for Basil to make, because if he loves Dorian and Dorian is his friend, to confess love to him, you could lose it entirely. He could walk away. Or if you keep him, the relationship is changed. So either way, this happens all the time, right? Like people fall in love with their best friends, whether it's bisexual or homosexual or heterosexual, it doesn't matter. People fall in love with their best friends, and then they want to tell them, but they don't want to tell them because that's your best friend. If you tell them and they don't return the feelings, your relationship is weird. It's changed. It's maybe over forever. If you tell them and best case scenario, they return the feelings, probably that relationship's going to end eventually and you lose your best friend anyway. So there's a danger in telling them. There's also a danger in not telling them, a peril of losing them no less than the peril of keeping them. Weeks and weeks went on, and I grew more and more absorbed in you. Then came a new development. I had drawn you as Paris in dainty armor, and as Adonis with a huntsman's cloak and polished boar spear. Crowned with heavy lotus blossoms, you had sat on the prow of Adrian's barge, gazing across the green turbid Nile. You had leaned over a still pool of some Greek woodland and seen in the water's silent silver the marvel of your own face. And it had all been what art should be, unconscious, ideal, and remote. These are all Greek allusions, right, to mythology. One day, a fatal day I sometimes think, I determined to paint a wonderful portrait of you as you actually are, not in the costume of dead ages, but in your own dress and in your own time. Whether it was the realism of the method, or the mere wonder of your own personality thus directly presented to me without mist or veil, I cannot tell. But I know that as I worked at it, every flake and film of color seemed to me to reveal my secret. I grew afraid that others would know of my idolatry. So the realism of the method. Remember, we're looking at romanticism and realism as two of the themes. Dorian's a very romantic figure, presented as Narcissus or Adonis or Paris. But when he decides to paint him realistically, the union, the harmony of realism and romanticism work in the picture, and he feels reveal his own soul. And that people would know of his idolatry. Idolatry is an interesting word for worship or idealism. I felt, Dorian, that I had told too much, that I had put too much of myself into it. Then it was that I resolved never to allow the picture to be exhibited. You were a little annoyed, but then you did not realize all that it meant to me. Harry, to whom I talked about it, laughed at me. But I did not mind that. When the picture was finished and I sat alone with it, I felt that I was right. Well, after a few days, the thing left my studio, and as soon as I had got rid of the intolerable fascination of its presence, it seemed to me that I had been foolish in imagining that I had seen anything in it, more than that you were extremely good-looking and that I could paint. Even now, I cannot help feeling that it is a mistake to think that the passion one feels in creation is ever really shown in the work one creates. It's creator-creation, some more sort of God talk here. Art is always more abstract than we fancy. Form and color tell us of form and color, that is all. It often seems to me that art conceals the artist far more completely than it ever reveals him. That goes back to the preface. And so when I got this offer from Paris, I determined to make your portrait the principal thing in my exhibition. It never occurred to me that you would refuse. I see now that you were right. The picture cannot be shown. And you must not be angry with me, Dorian, for what I have told you. As I said to Harry once, you are made to be worshipped. Dorian Gray drew a long breath. The color came back to his cheeks and a smile played about his lips. The peril was over. He was safe for the time. Yet he could not help feeling infinite pity for the painter who had just made this strange confession to him, and wondered if he himself would ever be so dominated by the personality of a friend. Lord Henry. Oh, Lord Henry had the charm of being very dangerous, but that was all. He was too clever and too cynical to be really fond of. Would there ever be someone who would fill him with a strange idolatry? Was this one of the things that life had in store? "It is extraordinary to me, Dorian," said Hallward, "that you have seen this in the portrait. Did you really see it?" Of course, you can picture Basil leaning in, waiting for Dorian's response. He just made a confession of love, essentially, to Dorian. He couched it in a little bit of language, so that it wasn't like, "I love you," but worship, idolatry, you were made to be worshipped. I mean, the phrases, when you look through here, "I grew jealous of everyone to whom you spoke. I wanted to have you all to myself. I was only happy when I was with you." Like, you go through, and it's pretty much a confession of love, and so he's waiting for his response. "Did you really see it?" "I saw something in it," he answered. "Something that seemed to be very curious." "Well, you don't mind my looking at the thing now?" Dorian shook his head. "You must not ask me that, Basil. I could not possibly let you stand in front of that picture." "You will someday, surely." "Never." "Well, perhaps you are right. And now goodbye, Dorian. You have been the one person in my life who has really influenced my art. Whatever I have done that is good, I owe to you. You don't know what it cost me to tell you all I have told you." "My dear Basil," said Dorian, "what have you told me? Simply that you felt that you admired me too much? That is not even a compliment." Ouch. "It was not intended as a compliment. It was a confession. Now that I have made it, something seems to have gone out of me. Perhaps one should never put one's worship into words. It was a very disappointing confession." I mean, this is really painful stuff. Dorian's just beaten down Basil like he did Sybil Vane. But from a dramatic irony point of view, we can understand why it's disappointing. Dorian's disappointed that he doesn't understand why the picture's changing. He hasn't got the information that he wanted to get out of it. Basil confessed that he loved him. That's not what he expected. So he is disappointed, but he doesn't understand how that hurts Basil. It's almost like Basil's emotions flew over his head and he missed it entirely, that he's unable to feel emotions, that because he's a spectator of his own life, he doesn't appreciate what's just happened on an emotional level. What did he say earlier in this chapter about emotion? See if I can find it. Yeah, he said, "I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them to enjoy them and to dominate them." Is he enjoying them? Probably. Is he dominating them? Certainly he's not feeling for Basil at all. It was a very disappointing confession. Why? What did you expect, Dorian? You didn't see anything else in the picture, did you? There was nothing else to see? No, there was nothing else to see. Why do you ask? But you mustn't talk about worship. It is foolish. You and I are friends, Basil. We must always remain so. "You've got Harry," said the painter sadly. "Oh, Harry!" cried the lad with a ripple of laughter. "Harry spends his days in saying what is incredible and his evenings in doing what is improbable. Just the sort of life I would like to lead. But still, I don't think I would go to Harry if I were in trouble. I would sooner go to you, Basil." Again, we can take this and look at it. If he's a god figure, who do you go to when you're in trouble? You pray, right? But you could look at it as medievalism versus Hellenism, or intellectualism versus emotion. When you're in trouble, you rely on your emotions. You rely on sort of the medieval morality and prayer rather than intellectualism and thinking through the logical answer. So this separation works. Realism and romanticism. When you're in trouble, you don't go to realism. You flee from realism into romanticism. And so on all of these levels, this statement works. All of the themes are sort of unified in this moment. "You will sit to me again? Impossible! You spoil my life as an artist by refusing, Dorian. No man came across two ideal things. Few come across one. I can't explain it to you, Basil, but I must never sit to you again. There is something fatal about a portrait. It has a life of its own. I will come and have tea with you. That will be just as pleasant." "Pleasanter for you, I am afraid," murmured Hallward regretfully. "And now goodbye. I am sorry you won't let me look at the picture once again, but it can't be helped. I quite understand what you feel about it." As he left the room, Dorian Gray smiled to himself. Poor Basil. How little he knew of the true reason, and how strange it was that instead of having been forced to reveal his own secret, he had succeeded almost by chance in wresting a secret from his friend. How much that strange confession explained to him. The painter's absurd fits of jealousy, his wild devotion, his extravagant panegyrics, his curious reticences. He understood them all now, and he felt sorry. There seemed to him to be something tragic in a friendship so colored by romance. He sighed and touched the bell. The portrait must be hidden away at all costs. He could not run such a risk of discovery again. It had been mad of him to have allowed the thing to remain even for an hour in a room to which any of his friends had access. All right, so let's look at one line from that last little bit. Seemed to him to be something tragic in a friendship so colored by romance. You can talk about romanticism if you want to. You can talk about Basil's gay love for Dorian. I think there's lots of things that you could extrapolate from that line. But it's another romance of Dorian's, and another romance that ends very much the same way, because Dorian is unable to invest emotionally because he's dominated his emotions, because he's become the spectator of his own life. He can no longer participate in it. And I think, maybe we're getting down to some thematic stuff when everything you enjoy is for an artistic perspective. Are you really present in any of it? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But that's chapter 9. Obviously, Basil did not succeed in wresting Dorian from Lord Henry's influence. That influence continues. We're going to move on to chapter 10 next time, and I will do a little bit of recap and discussion of themes and things that are going on in this chapter. See y'all tomorrow.